that's over there. As you can imagine, there's a lot of people on the call this morning, and we did ask that you submitted your questions when you registered, which I'm very grateful that you sent that information over for. Thank you. We can't possibly get through all of those questions, so I've tried to summarize where possible so that we hopefully will cover as much as we can during the session. I know there's a lot to go through. And then at the end, if we've got chance for some more questions, we'll be able to put those to the panelists as well. So first of all, I'm going to kick off and come to Amelia and to Millie. And if you could just maybe just chat us through where you actually started with funding, when you started your business, and maybe what things you found surprising, what were the things that you maybe didn't expect on that part of your journey?
Yeah, I'm very happy to go. So I am slightly odd in that we started in 2006 and obviously we're now 20 years in. So the first 15 years were tinkering. It was a side hustle. I had a full-time job, and we bootstrapped, which basically means you buy a small amount of stock, you sell a small amount of stock, you use that money to rebuy more stock. But it wasn't ever with the intention of paying myself or making any kind of money. So it wasn't really a commercial decision to launch the business. I basically did it because I wanted to go back into hospital to the people who I was in hospital with and give them the same thing that I'd given myself. So selfishly wanted something I could use, and then they wanted it, and then it was kind of word of mouth. Once we got to 2021, that's when it started to change. So just to give you a kind of idea, we had £5,000 in the first 15 years was the money we put into the business. That went predominantly on stock, a very shoddy website, and a very basic warehouse fulfillment setup that basically meant we only paid, they very kindly didn't charge us for storage. I also had a friend that worked in cleaning products, so they stored some of our materials, but I basically begged, borrowed and stealed, so I didn't spend any money. And then only paid for orders that we shipped. So there was very little cost incurred unless we sold stuff. Once we got to 2021, we were then selling kids' crutches, adult crutches, walking sticks. That product development needed cash. I did credit cards initially. I have now taken on an overdraft through Lloyds, and we'll be looking at invoice financing. I also applied for the Stelios grant, which I would say 3,000,000% every single person on this call should apply for. It was a one-page application. They are the nicest people. And it was about the simplest start to finish, 2 interviews, 1 A4 application, 60K in the bank within 48 hours of winning. It was the dream. And that meant we could develop folding walking sticks, which we launched last year. So lots of different bits, I guess, from starting to scaling in terms of funding. But I think the one thing that I didn't know and didn't anticipate was the cost of inventory is killer. And the timing from when you order your stock to when you actually sell it is incredibly important to understand before you start doing it. Because what I had 3 years ago was that I bought too much stock. The time from ordering it to it landing to it then be ready to sell was closer to 4 months, which meant from a cash flow point of view, I'd incurred panic attacks, sleepless nights, which could all have been avoided if I'd been a bit more aware of like what that cycle looks like, when you're going to need money, how much money, and actually that not having money doesn't mean you're failing. It just means you didn't get the right mechanics in place to deliver it in a way that's going to not cause you stress. Hopefully helpful.
Thanks, Amelia. What about you, Millie? Let's just talk us through your journey a little.
Sure. I would say, sorry, on the Stelios thing this year, you have to be turning over £100,000 or more, or it might even be 200,000. So for a lot of small businesses, it's pretty unrealistic to be able to. I applied a few years ago, and the entry requirements were much lower. But even for the young entrepreneur thing, I think it's still over 100,000 that they need as a turnover for eligibility. So yeah, I just thought I'd mention that because I know when you find something and then see the eligibility, it's kind of crushing, especially for a disabled one. But yeah, so my journey, so a bit more background on me. I grew up with a rare genetic condition that only affects 3,000 people in the world. I've had 2 kidney transplants in the last 5 years, and I was bullied growing up, so I used makeup as a form of therapy. I used it to realize who I was, but I became really frustrated by the lack of representation and the lack of accessibility in a pretty toxic industry. To start with, like Amelia says, like when you're doing a product-based business, inventory is where all your money goes, especially when doing things that are innovative or slightly different. A lot of makeup is what you call like white label, so it's made in the same factory as everywhere else and you can just slap your logo on it. But when you're doing something unique, the minimum order quantities are huge. So to start with, I used some of my own savings. I did a small crowdfunding through GoFundMe. That was kind of a bit rushed. If I could go back again, I would definitely do it differently. But I basically was appearing on a show called Born Different, and they have about 10 million subscribers on YouTube, and they're on Snapchat. So at this point, I didn't actually have the products in my hand, but I wanted to use this show as an opportunity to kind of do some advertising and put up a bit of a GoFundMe or like a pre-orders. And then, yeah, it took like 6 months from that point to get the products. And my main source of funding has been grants and pitching competitions. It's hard work finding them, but I would really like, that's been the biggest surprise, I guess, is how much money you can win from pitching. If you've got a story and you can build your confidence. I remember I did my first pitching competition at uni and I was terrified, and I'm terrified every time, but that's the best way to get your story out there, because with grants it's great, but when you're in person, you get to answer questions and kind of clear up any confusion or miscommunication that might come across on a written grant, and you can see the people in front of you and kind of appeal to their human nature. So everything I've done so far, I still own 100% of Human Beauty. It has all been from grants and pitching competitions.
That's amazing to hear, Millie, and really nice as well to hear that it's we talk a lot about how different flexibility with how people can apply for things and whatever that looks like, and that ability, like you say, to have that human contact, right? So that you can kind of read off how that person's feeling, what they're saying. You've got that visual cue, right? And if filling in a form or sending an application in, written format isn't your strong suit, or there's barriers that are being caused by that, then having that flexibility in application method makes all the difference. So we're going to come back to grants in the next, not the next question, the question after. So we're going to come back and talk more about that. So thank you for kicking that off for sure. How should founders think about the different types of funding available? So Amelia and Millie have already mentioned that there's several different angles and routes that they might have gone down, but this is, I guess, aimed at Nadej and Karen. I wanted to come to you. So there's obviously different types of funding available. As we've seen already with the Stelios Foundation, there's certain criteria that you need to be meeting, and some types of funding don't work for everybody. So what are those sort of things and thoughts, processes that people maybe need to have before they start to look for funding, or what are those conversations they need to have with themselves or their teams before they go out to look for the cash that they need for their business?
Indeed. I'll go first on that one. Yep. Okay. The first thing to think about is how you've incorporated your business. So we know a lot of businesses may choose to operate as a sole trader or go via the route of being a limited company. And the reason I mention this is quite important because that could actually become as a barrier to accessing finance down the later the line. For example, if you're registered as a sole trader, there are limited types of access to finance you can get. And also when you are a sole trader, things like your personal assets, like a car, house, become a liability when you apply for an asset when you apply for finance. But it just means, they're also taken as security. So that's something to think about that. Whereas if you're set up as a limited company, you've got limited liability there. So that's really, really important to understand how you've incorporated your business and what that can get you in terms of finance later down the line. And then the other aspect to understand is what types of finance is available. So often, people always apply for like just a standard loan, but there's so many types. Amelia touched upon, I think, having an overdraft. There's overdraft, there's invoice finance, asset finance. And the reason I mention this is sometimes you can get declined for financing just by applying for the wrong type of finance. So it's really about understanding what is available out there. So if you've got just a short-term cash flow need, where you've got cash coming in the next month or in a couple of weeks, an overdraft is absolutely perfect. So that helps you to fill in those peaks and troughs of your cash flow cycle, which is really important for you to understand how you're going to operate your cash and how it's coming in. So having just a good cash flow, monitoring tool is super important. And I think the earlier you get into that discipline from the outset of your business, the better that will help you as you grow to your business. Secondly, what do you need to do? Do you need to purchase an asset? Is that what you're looking for? That and things like that. That means an asset finance might be the most suitable. And I think Millie touched upon purchasing inventory. If I think about, for example, if you are you're putting your product with supermarkets. That's a good example. You want your products on the supermarket shelves. Some retailers are absolutely fantastic, are paying you quickly. Some are not. So you could be, waiting for 30, 60 days until you get your money. And that's where different types of finance, such as invoice finance, can support you, because essentially the bank will advance you that money, and then later down the line, Tesco pays the bank the money. So it's really about understanding what different types of finance are available and which one is most suitable to your business. And then conversely, alongside that is what types of security do you have to offer, because that is the number one question, when you're applying for finance from any bank. They ask, do you have security that you're able to offer? We've got so much of this information on our website, and maybe Gemma can post this in the chat later on, of where you can get more information. But this also comes back to Steph's introduction earlier, joining those accelerators that we've got, the Lilac Mentoring. These are all set up to help you understand all of these types of products and what you need to do to get yourself in the best place to apply for finance. And I'll pause there.
Thanks, Nadej. I've realised obviously that Karen has left the fluster. We couldn't get the sound to it. Matt, I wondered if you had anything to add into that. And also just a comment I've just seen in the chat. I know, Matt, ahead of this, you mentioned Grantify was something you were going to speak about, but someone's just said that they've looked at the page before, it felt a little bit scammy. Is it legit? Is it something that's set up to help people? So that would be, I wondered if you could maybe speak to that a little bit as well, because people are asking, where do they look to find options of grants that might be available to apply for?
Sorry, is the question about Grantify itself that it looked a bit?
Specifically, yeah. So someone has said that they looked at it before and it felt a bit like a sales page and a bit scammy. But is it a legitimate page? Is it something that people can trust?
Yes, yeah, it's definitely a legitimate organisation, and they provide support with applying for grants and other types of finance. I'm not an expert on Grantify, but yes, I can definitely say it's legitimate and it's not a scam. Just back to the other question about types of finance. I mean, I think as Nadej has said, there's a range of different finance products, and it can be quite confusing. So I think I'm not going to say any more on that. The Lloyds Bank link is excellent in terms of explaining what those different types of finance are. And without wanting to sort of preempt some of the other questions, I think the thing I'd really encourage people to do is to think about finance at every stage of the business, because we're seeing an increasing and a worrying number of businesses that are applying for finance, particularly in the current economy and the current climate when cash flow is an issue, and they're applying for finance at the point at which they really need the cash. And so what happens then is you'll go onto Google and you'll be bombarded with adverts from high-cost commercial lenders, and they can be very good at getting you the cash quickly, but you'll pay a lot more for that. And we're seeing a worrying trend of businesses coming to the CDFI, the responsible finance sector, having stacked loan upon loan with high-cost commercial lenders and having to refinance. And most of them say, gosh, I wish I knew about CDFIs and responsible finance in the first place, because often these high-cost commercial loans can appear quite low cost. because they're not always regulated by the FCA. They're not always transparent with the fees that they charge. There are early repayment fees, etc., etc. So just thinking about this at every stage of your journey, not leaving it as an afterthought. So investing some time in those accelerator programs, as Nad suggested, and doing a bit of research, it will be really helpful later on down the line.
Brilliant,
I just got something, Gemma. Well, that's super important. And get in the habit of opening a business account. Please do not operate your business from your personal account. How banks and other financial institutions assess your ability to borrow, they will go and look at your account you're operating from. They will look at, if you say you're turning over X and Y per month or per year, they will use that account that you said you're earning from to check whether you can afford loan repayments. So it's really super important to separate your personal and business finances. Sorry, super important, Gemma.
No, and I think that's the sort of thing that those kinds of tips from people in the know are really important, right? Because you don't know what you don't know, and there's not always somewhere to go and find all these things. So thank you for that. We're just going to take a little break, and we're going to give Chris a rest. If you need to go grab a drink, stretch your legs, we'll come back at about 20. So we'll have a few minutes. So we'll come back about 25 to. So just a short break to give everyone a little minute. Thank you so much for everyone's interaction so far, much appreciated. Let's crack on. So spoken a little bit about different types of funding, about grants, expert insider tips from Nadej. And we know that lots of founders are looking for grants over loans. It feels like a no-brainer. I think when you think it feels a lot less risky, right? And a lot less responsibility. But I guess how realistic is that? And Millie, I know a lot of people in the chat have been kind of asking where would they look for grants and where do you kind of find those opportunities? So I wondered if you wanted to share a little bit about how you've managed to find those grants that you've managed to apply for. How do you go about looking for that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's a lot of digging. I do a lot of Googling. I've set up Google notifications. I have a WhatsApp group for young female entrepreneurs, and we kind of share what we've seen. But it is just a lot of keeping an eye out on Google and LinkedIn. I would say I definitely think it is realistic, especially in the beginning. It is a lot of work for sometimes not very much money, but it can be really rewarding. I think, especially, I was always told from the beginning that I would find it very difficult to get grants, especially ones that are from Innovate UK and those kind of bigger organizations, because I have a beauty brand. They're not great at funding consumer goods businesses. However, I did get an Innovate UK grant. I won £50,000 from their Inclusive Innovations grant. That was my third attempt. And their applications definitely aren't for the faint-hearted. They are long, but it was worth it. I had applied for the Women in Innovation one and the Young Entrepreneurs one, and they this is why I like pitching, because some of the feedback, they're anonymous assessors, and I think sometimes, depending on maybe the age and the gender of who is assessing, they can read the application completely differently to another assessor. But I think perseverance does pay off. And especially if your business, despite what you're selling, if your business has a story and a really core story that people can relate to and a unique selling point, I would say always go for it. I think story first will always win, especially on grants and pitching competitions. I always lead with my story, and then the products and the community come second. I'd also say entering, especially at the beginning, entering awards that don't necessarily have money to win is great for awareness. I won the Young Entrepreneur of the Year at the Great British Entrepreneur Awards. I was named the Entrepreneur of the Year at the National Diversity Awards last year. And all of these things, despite not having money, they give you credibility. So then when you do go up and stand up on stage or apply for grants, you've got some backing behind you. I did the Founder Vine and Lloyds pitching competition. So that was an accelerator that then had a pitch at the end, which is really, really great, especially, again, if you're kind of early to kind of mid stages. It teaches you everything that you need to know about growing and kind of reaching out to investors. And at the end, we got the chance, everyone got the chance to apply to then pitch their business. And I won £12,000, which was really, really, really great, and kind of came at a perfect time. But I would just say, just keep practicing, just apply for all the pitching competitions that you can, because the more you do it, the easier it gets. I was actually on Dragon's Den last year, which is probably the biggest pitch I've ever done, but which was terrifying. But again, like, it's all about sharing your story and connecting with people. So that's my biggest advice. And if people want to connect with me, I've got a list of pitching competitions and awards that I can suggest applying for.
That's amazing. Thank you. There's lots of people asking if they can join your WhatsApp group, Millie. And also people saying how inspiring you and Amelia both are, and they knew they recognised you from somewhere. Now we know. So thank you for that, Millie. Really, and again, to the Innovate UK, you know, it is a big application form, right? And I know that that's changed recently. That's been made simpler, more simple. But applications can be overwhelming in all kinds of remits, right? So the actual thought of applying for it, like you say, kind of building that awareness of your brand and your story is super important, because if you've got that out there and you're doing that anyway, you kind of got a lot of that information already. But the thought of applying for something, the process, the inflexibility sometimes with it. So when we think about applications in general, so to banks, Nadej, to Lloyds, Matt, to CDFIs, what support is out there, and how can people ask for support with this kind of thing? Are there options around, you know, what seems to be like a very strict set of rules when people are applying? What kind of support and resources are there to help people when they're looking at applications for funding and finance?
Do you want me to go first, Matt?
Yeah, go for it, Nad.
No problem. So in terms of Lloyds, application depends on how much you're applying for. So we've got online, if you're especially easy when you're a Lloyds customer, because everything is done in the background. They look at your bank account, the amount you're asking for, and whether you can afford the repayment. I think it's really, really important to think about, if any time you're applying for any type of funding, how are you going to repay it back? Unless it's a grant, of course, you don't have to worry about or anything like that. But if you're going to come to any financial institution, the first thing to think about is how are you going to pay that money back? And the reason for that is, you know, banks like ourselves, Lloyds, the Big Four, and all the other financial are heavily regulated, and we hold a huge amount of responsibility to make sure we can only lend money to businesses who are able to afford the repayments. Otherwise, it's just irresponsible lending. So I say that before you get to the application process and you start thinking about all of these things, to just have those answers in the back of your mind is really, really important. So I've mentioned before you can apply online, but we do also have a telephony team where you can call them and talk about your loan application. Again, I can pop the links in the chat. I'm just not looking at the chat too much because I'm trying to focus, and that was takes a little bit. But we do have a telephony team. If you're finding things difficult to understand, they will take the time to speak to you about your application, have a conversation of what you're looking for, and maybe also signpost you to our web resources. Or if we can't support you, you know, we've been working very closely with Matt and Responsible Finance to support businesses we can't help, to signpost them to responsible lenders. So there is a lot of support out there. Also, in addition to the support that Steph mentioned at the start of the call, you know, lots of mentoring. And I think what the other important point to note, and I think it's been called out by Amelia and Amelia, applications, there's an art to applications, and it comes with practice. And I think, you know, things like pitching competitions, applying for grants, they really get you in the habit of articulating your business, because when you come to applying for loans with the bank, it's exactly the same thing. You're articulating your business. What do? You know, in really simple terms, just get in the habit, because we know you know We know you know your business, right? You're the founder, you're the entrepreneurs, or you're the finance expert, applying, making that loan application. That there is also an art to making the application, explaining to a completely different stranger who's never heard of you what you do, as to why you want the money, what your mission is, and how you're going to pay that repay that finance back. So I think get in the habit of doing, whether it's applying for grants, because they just get that muscle active, so that when you do come to making a loan applications, essentially they're asking questions that you've heard 1,000 times, and you can and I think that helps from my perspective. I also think, do reach out to other founders. There's so many founders who've gained access to finance. And I think one of the thing I absolutely love about this community, everyone is so helpful. I don't think you should be doing anything alone. There's so many people, whether you reach out on LinkedIn or as part of this community, whilst I'm not reading messages, so many people are ready and willing to help. Ask the question. If you go to networking events, do not be afraid to ask another founder. It's like, how did you get finance? The likes of Amelia and Millie, they're always ready and available to share, what did they do? There are no secrets being kept here, no gatekeeping, as we like to say. So I just think, ask the right questions to your fellow entrepreneurs, and you'd be surprised the amount of information they're willing to share, and also us.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nadej. I think sometimes there is that fear, isn't there, about approaching organisations, because someone's mentioned in the chat there RSD and people that have got those neurodivergent conditions, where that just the fear of the rejection puts people off taking that action. So knowing that there's the support out there and that there's people that you can speak to ahead of that or during that process is super helpful. Matt, was there anything you wanted to add into that?
Yeah, really helpful from Nad. I would just say, this is one area where responsible finance providers stand out, and I would encourage people to give them a call. So I'll reiterate that our members are not there to make profit. They're there to support your business and to get you to the right point. So we would always say, first, try a mainstream bank, try Lloyds. I'm going to say that because Nat's on the call, but they're an excellent bank, and they're doing loads to support widening access to finance. But, you'll get the best rate there if you're eligible. If not, speak to a CDFI. They're relationship-led. They're about people. So they're not just algorithm focused. They don't make binary decisions. They'll give you a call. They'll be patient with you. They'll talk it through. I've noticed some of the comments in the chats about these things being daunting and overwhelming. They often are. They're used to dealing with people who are coming to find business finance for the first time. And they also will come out and see you if you're local. CDFIs are based across the UK. So that human approach often makes finance feel much more accessible. And we find that if somebody's willing to work through the application, the conversation often starts not at how much do you need and what can you afford to repay. The conversation with the CDFI often starts with, tell me about your business idea and what you want to achieve and the impact you want to make. These organisations will be genuinely interested in you. And if they think, they're also very honest. So if they think, actually, given your circumstances, you should be applying to Lloyds, they'll tell you. I would say speak to CDFIs. That's what they're there for. Their relationship focused approach is core to their kind of DNA.
Brilliant, thank you, Chris.
Jen, just quickly, obviously I've been doing this for a very, very, very long time, but I also will hold my hands up and say, now you're going to be like, what are you talking about? But I'm like, I started and was like, I don't really know how much money I need, and I don't really want to go near a bank, because my perception has always been they'll try and reel you in, and it will be a bit like a phone contract where you'll be like, I'll pay $15.99 a month, and then within 6 months they sneakily put in the terms and conditions it's actually going to be 5% on that, and then you're stuck in it and you're never going to pay it back, and it's going to be a nightmare. Like, I'm 20 years into this, and it's only in the last 12 months that I've taken an overdraft from Lloyds, because you have to understand that your psychology has always been banks are bad, people are going to try and catch you out, it's all going to be a horrible weave of, I applied for Innovate UK, I got halfway through the application and I thought, I feel sick, I've got a headache, this feels too complicated, I'm out. They're trying to trick me. It's so different now, and it's taken the last 3 years of genuinely being at multiple events with Gemma, multiple events with Nadej, seeing Lloyds everywhere, there are genuine banks that are trying to help, and they want to know about you, and they want to know about your business, and they want to know about your intentions and whether or not you are a safe bet, more than they want to see what's on paper. So I think there's less of this, like, show me your bank statement. I want to see what's gone in and out of your personal account and in and out of your business account. And that's what we'll decide on. And a lot more on, what are your intentions? Why did you start your business? What do you want the money for? Because money for stock and money for marketing are two very different things. And they're the two biggest, like, zaps of money. But money for marketing is a never ending pot that I could fill over and over and over again. Money for stock, they'll want to see, okay, you're going to buy 100 units. How long is it going to take you to sell them? What's the cost of fulfilling them? How long are they going to sit on a shelf? Have you thought about how much the storage is going to cost if they don't sell within a month? That's mechanics that is time. That's ChatGPT. Like, I need to have a map from when I get this to when it's going to go. But they want to see the way you think. And there's a lot more value, controversial, in a disabled entrepreneur, from my point of view, that you have probably underestimated that you bring to the table. And it's actually a very big edge when you go into, like, a female founder environment or a young entrepreneur environment. Having a disability is a serious positive, because you will think differently to how most other people think when it comes to running a business. So I do think it's really important to understand that you're up against stigmas around borrowing money that will drive you away from it. And it's really important that you understand that there are banks. I've had loads, I won't name and shame, but there are 4 or 5 other banks that we've worked with that were awful. They are not all the same. They are not all trying to catch you out. And speaking to a human, even at an event, on the phone, pick up the phone, however you want to talk to them, do it in a way that feels right for you. Because if you communicate with them in a way that you feel comfortable, they'll get the best out of you as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, Amelia. Thank you. And I think it's like Nadej was saying about the community as well, is that the more times you speak about the plans for the business, the more times you speak with organisations like Lloyds, or, you know, Responsible Finance, with CDFIs, with colleagues, with peers, with us at the Lilac Centre, small business, whatever it is, whoever it is you're speaking to, the more you practice those conversations about what your plans are and what the future looks like, it kind of gets that rhythm and routine going with how you then maybe fill an application form in, or how you deliver a pitch, or how you kind of hone that skill. And again, I guess back to the mentoring as well, we've got free resources available to help support people through these things. And we've had people that have applied for mentoring knowing that they're about to do a great big pitch, and they want that kind of support from somebody in the know a little bit more ahead of that. And that kind of support is available. And I would always say, you know, reach out to those people within your planet, solar system, to try and help direct you to somebody that can maybe help with that ahead of things. I'm very conscious that we're running out of time. Chris, are you okay for us to come? Thank you. Jeet is an angel. Okay, so lots and lots and lots of things that we could cover, but I wanted to come to you, Amelia, on this one, if that's okay, just because we've spoken a little bit about it already. But some of the questions that we had submitted were around investment, and how do you know when it's the right time? You know, did you get to a point where you're like, right, now I'm ready for investment? Was it a slow process? Was it a light bulb moment? How did you kind of get to that point where you're like, right, now I'm ready, and this is time for us to take that next step? And how did that thought process kind of come about? How did you deal with that?
So I hate borrowing money. I shouldn't say that on this call. I hate being in debt. I hate anything to do with being out of my means or spending beyond my means. So from a business point of view, I have always clocked every single penny that goes in and out of our business. I have spreadsheets that come out of my ears. I have had to go full tilt to 10 spreadsheets, spending all day on Monday looking at numbers to then pull back. And I think the volume of time that you as a founder spend looking at cash directly correlates to how much you need. So whenever we get to a pinch point, I find that I'm logging it and I'm looking at, right, we're paying a supplier in Europe. How long is that? You know, what's the exchange rate? How much money am I losing to that? Da, 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 da. If I start getting to a point where it's taking more than 4 hours on a Monday to look at cash, I know we don't have enough of it. So I think you have to figure out what your cadences in terms of what are you looking at. So things like, I look at cash every Monday. I don't do it more often than that. It'll just drive you potty. I do a P&L monthly. I don't do it any more than that because it's no point. I have an accountant that now does management accounts for us. But again, I have a conversation with them quarterly. I don't do it any more often than that. And if you start to get your baseline and what your bank balance should look like on the first of every month, and you're tracking that, I think when that starts to fluctuate to a point where you start to feel panicked and you're starting to run more numbers to be like, oh, that's when you need more money. But as Matt said, you always need more money. And I think it's taken me, the best part of 4 years to realize that actually if someone gave me 100 grand today, I'd turn it into 300 grand pretty quickly. So it's not a case of like, you don't need it. If someone gave me more, we could sell more, we could do more with it. You could always do with more money. I would always do as Millie does and always keep your finger on the pulse, always talk to other founders about where they've had investment, whether it's from grants, whether it's from pitching competitions, whatever it is, do it, because it's not going to cost you more than it's going to reward you. Even if I've never been to an event or a pitching thing or anything like that where I haven't met somebody else that's also had a grant, or Millie's been on Dragon's Den and you can ask her about that. Like, there are always options, but I think you need to think about money the whole time, because if you're running a successful business, it's when you're going to need it, not if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Is there any more comments on that? Anybody else want to chip in on that topic? Millie, over to you.
Yeah, so I think being really picky with, and once you get to the point where you need investors, I still haven't found investors, because I want to be cautious, because I know a lot of young female disabled or non-disabled entrepreneurs who have been taken advantage of. There are a lot of investors out there who, a friend of mine no longer owns the majority share of her business, and said investor actually didn't invest any money. It was like a skills for investment. And I think, when an older person who kind of may be successful comes to you and says, oh, you go to them, and they say, oh, well, I can help you and my skills are worth this much in money. I think like having communities and soundboarding it off of people is so important, because if my friend had come to me and said, this guy is amazing, he mentored me from an accelerator, he's going to help my business, but he's taking 55% of my business, I would have been like, oh my God, what are you doing? But it was too late by the time she told me. So I think if anyone wants to connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram, I will add you to the group, because I can't find a link to share it. But I think being careful, I know so many founders who regret picking the investor they did. And I think picking investors based on like ethics and who they are is so much more important than rushing it to get money or seemingly good skills. Just on that, I also think never ever pay for someone to give you advice about like writing applications, or like mentoring. I met a girl the other day who was paying hundreds of pounds for like someone to kind of write grants or like pitching. Or if you do, like, I would never do it, but I think like people like me and in my community, there are so many people that would offer to help and advice for free. I just would never do that. And be careful if I said about entering awards, but any awards that charge hundreds, don't bother. And if you do get to be a finalist, some of the awards do charge a couple £100 for a seat at the table at the awards, even though the awards are free. I would say it's always worth reaching out and saying as an access requirement that the cost of the event is too much as a disabled founder, and to fight your corner for that. If you've been a finalist, you deserve to be there. And I don't believe in like pay to win, basically, even though it's a free event.
Thanks, Millie. Yeah, super important. And I think everything we've kind of spoken about this morning, it's knowing that there's people out there that have got your back and that are happy to help and for free. The team at Lloyds the team at Small Business Britain, the team at Responsible Finance, Karen, who was here and has gone, bless her, the CDFIs that Responsible Finance can direct you to. There's a huge network of people out there that have the information, even if it's not that person that you directly get in touch with. We often know the right people that we can direct you to that can offer that support. I think the finance code, the disability finance code for entrepreneurship that's been created, as Steph mentioned, the banks that are signed up to that have committed to being more inclusive, more accessible. So that's not just the products, that's through design, that's through the systems, that's through their colleagues. It's a full, 360 view of everything, and the banks have committed to that. So there are teams out there that are working to make sure that disabled and neurodivergent founders are supported at all parts of their business journey, and particularly, as we're talking about this morning, with regards to finance and funding. We are at the end of the hour. I think we could probably talk about this for weeks. There's so many different angles that we could look at. I wanted to say thank you to everyone that's joined this morning for all the questions that you submitted. I'm very sorry if we didn't cover your specific question, but please know that our emails at the Lilac Centre, Small Business Britain, are always on. You're more than welcome to get in touch. So it's hello@lilaccentre.com. I've shared the link in the chat if you saw that. I don't know, for the networking group we've got on LinkedIn, designed for disabled and neurodivergent founders. We've got over 450 entrepreneurs in there now that are, again, as Millie said, the community is so important, and there's people in there that will help you find the right kind of support that you're looking for, maybe answer a question or connect you with somebody that does know the answer. The recording, Emma, well, I will share a newsletter to everyone that's joined this morning. So all the links that people have mentioned will be in there so that you can connect with Millie, you can connect with Amelia. We'll share all the links to Lloyds, to Matt, Responsible Finance, and to Karen, the lovely Karen. Thank you so much. If you need anything at all, please do connect with us, and the recording will be shared so you can watch this back, pause bits, skip bits that weren't relevant to you, and really focus on those things that might be important. So a massive thank you to all of my lovely panelists this morning. Thank you so much. A very big thank you to the lovely Chris for being excellent as always, and to everyone that's joined us this morning as a viewer. Thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you on the next Lilac Centre webinar taking place on the 28th of April with the lovely Susie Payton, all about business confidence for disabled and neurodivergent founders. So sign up to that one, and we'll see you there really soon. Thank you so much, and happy whatever day it is, Tuesday, I think. Okay.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you all. Bye.